episode of the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. It's a bonus episode of the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Come on now!
Hey everybody, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and if you happen to be listening to this in real time, then you're like, wait a minute, this is Saturday. We don't do this on Saturdays, but you're wrong. Sometimes we do it on Saturdays. This is one of those days. I thought we just had a really fun week of talking about the biblical concept of casting lots and dice and claromancy and using some form of what looks on the surface like chance to determine the will of God. Now, it's an odd practice. I'm not saying do that or don't do that. But what I am saying is that all those examples that we came up with, mostly just off the top of my head, really easily and really quickly throughout the Bible, there's none of them cast a negative light on the practice or discourage it. At worst, the treatment by the biblical authors is indifference or neutrality. And at best, the indication is, casting lots in that situation was a way to figure out the will of God, or at least to get unstuck and move forward. And I'm very sorry for my voice. This has been a long journey for me, so I get that I'm a little bit crackly, but thank you for bearing with me. So get this. I recorded all that stuff, and then here just a couple of minutes ago, I called my dad, who I love and is smart and who taught me how to think. And I was like, hey, Dad, I made these episodes about casting lots this week on the podcast. Isn't that interesting? And Dad was like, well, that reminds me of a story one time from a church that I pastored when you were young. And then he started to tell me that story. And then I was like, Dad, stop. Just save all of that so I can hear it for the first time. I'm going to put you on a microphone and we're going to do this and we're going to share it with everybody. So guess what? My dad has been here this whole time with you and me right here on the phone. Hi, Dad.
Hi, the stealth father in the background.
No, you were sneaky. You did a good job. You didn't make any weird grunts or clicks or anything. Like, you were just quiet. It was very good.
Okay. All right.
Okay. For the uninitiated, my dad's name is Rex Whitman. He's a longtime Baptist pastor, and he's a very good husband and a very good dad and a very good thinker. And he sits around and reads and studies all the time and is just wonderful for bouncing ideas off of on things like this. And so he started to tell me the story, and now you know who you're listening to. So, Dad, now I would like to hear your story about that thing that casting lots reminded you of.
Okay. Well, in years of ministry, one of the things that never happened, or rarely, if ever, was casting lots, except for one church. We were up in northern Colorado. It was a church that we were planting, and we were donated a building to plant the church in. But the congregation was small, and we were faced with a decision on whether to keep these wooden floors that we had in the sanctuary, or if we were going to do a carpet in the sanctuary. And we were puzzling over what to do. We took a vote, and the vote came out 50-50. It was exactly even.
Even between, wait, what were the two ideas again?
To leave the floor as a wooden floor, or to carpet it in the sanctuary.
Gotcha.
And it would have been divisive. It would have divided the congregation had we gone one way or the other. And one of the men in the congregation said, well, why don't we draw lots? They do that in the Bible. And we said, well, that's a great idea. So on a Sunday morning, before we were very far into the worship service, Charlie was his name, came forward, and he had, I think it was 2 pencils of different lengths. And we decided which one represented the wooden floor and which one represented the carpet. And we simply drew lots, and it came out the wooden floor. And so the church did not buy carpet, and the unity of the church was maintained. And it was a beautiful church anyway. I don't think anybody was cranky, but we did want to protect the unity.
And so everybody agreed beforehand, almost like a lawsuit or something where you avoid going to court in favor of third-party mediation. Everybody just agreed that the third-party mediator would be the drawing of lots, and hopefully God is behind the decision.
That's right. And so we prayed, and we drew the lots, and it came up the wooden floor, and the unity of the church was maintained, and everybody agreed to it in advance and afterwards. And there was never a peep about what we should do about the floor in the sanctuary. So the drawing of lots served a valuable purpose from a practical standpoint as a church planter trying to maintain unity in a very young and tender church that, if they had gone through a split, would have been devastating to that congregation. And so the drawing of lots really was a part of the history of the establishing of that church.
Now, it's interesting because it seems like the public nature of it was really important. We've been looking at Esther 3, and I'd never noticed before that it wasn't just Haman who cast the poor, who cast the lot. It says they, and the antecedent there I wasn't able to detect for sure. They might refer to the royal officials who questioned Mordecai about not bowing to Haman and then reported that to Haman, or it might refer to diviners or court magicians. I don't know. It just said they cast the lot. So there was a group of people there to do it, and it seems like that at least semi-public nature of what they did there was meant to give it legitimacy. And he got the worst outcome possible because he cast the lot on the first month and it came up the 12th month. So he had to wait 11 months to do his thing. And he clearly wanted to do it, but apparently it was binding, in part because there were other witnesses to this. I think if you guys got together as an elder board and you cast lots in private and then you came out and were like, well, we cast lots and all of the carpet people lost. Sorry, but there were lots. I don't think it would have worked. I think the fact that everybody just agreed to abide by it and then that it happened in front of their faces, I think it seems to me at least that played a factor. Does that make sense, or do you think it would have worked just as well if you'd done it in private?
No, it needed to be public, and part of our model that we were thinking of was the passage in Acts where Judas was replaced by Matthias.
Yeah, that's one of the examples that came up this week. Yeah.
And so we were saying, well, this needs to be public. It needs to be everyone involved in it, because we assume that it was the 11 that drew lots, or at least were present at that drawing of the lots. And so it needed to be public. And so that's why we did it on a Sunday morning. And it was a part of our worship service on that particular Sunday, was the drawing of lots. That was the one and only time we ever used the drawing of lots in 45 years of ministry. Yeah, but it was very valuable.
Yeah, I don't remember that being a common practice. I mean, generally speaking, if I were to make a spectrum of Christians who I know, and at one end I would put the mystical Christians who have lots of spiritual practices and do lots of things that they believe give them unique personal guidance from God. And at the other end of the spectrum, I put the Christians who are very non-mystical. They tend to be very logical, very rational, Bible-oriented. We kind of solve it that way. I would put you very far to the non-mystical end of the spectrum of Christians I know. But the lot thing, it kind of sounds a little bit mystical. How is that different from some of the other mystical practices that people might employ to try to seek the will of God?
Well, I think for us, we had a very clear decision, one way or the other. I think even with picking an apostle, they had directives and requirements that came before they ever drew the lots. So there was a limitation to, all of the factors that went into this decision. They had to be present and have seen the entire ministry of Christ and been a witness to the resurrection. And so there were limiting factors to the lots that directed that decision. And so I think there's probably some type of limiting factors. I don't think you can just draw a lot, and say, where should I live in the world? You might as well throw a dart at a map and decide that. But if you say, well, I want a city where there are good schools, where there's good entertainment, where there's good shopping, where I know people, where people
Sure.
are friendly, you limit that and then you make a decision. Well, I think even with the lots, there was a limiting of the decisions before the lot was cast.
So you wouldn't have cast lots in church if the two agenda items were, all right, if it's the long pencil, we're going to carpet the floor. If it's the short pencil, we're going to become a Satanist church. You wouldn't leave that decision to lots. What I'm hearing you say is that you were properly stuck. You were at a decisional impasse, and you felt like either option could perfectly fit within the will of God. I don't know. Maybe you wanted carpet. Maybe you didn't. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of making light of it, but at the same time, that expense is a big deal for a fledgling church that's still in its vulnerable phase. And so it was a real issue, and it needed to be taken seriously. And maybe God did have a thing that he wanted, but you could at least see how both of these would move things forward in a good way. And so this really was, as much as anything, an unsticking mechanism. Is that fair?
Yeah, we weren't, either of those decisions, you could say, are in the will of God. There was no moral issue involved in either of them. It was limited in the choices that were made, and it was a simple way to handle all of that. And I think it served us well.
Okay, let me ask you this: what would be the ethical difference between what you did there and the following situation? All the circumstances are the same: carpet, no carpet, fledgling church. We don't have a lot of money. What are we going to do here? Well, Charlie has proposed that we are going to gut a chicken, and he's pretty good at looking at its entrails, and we're going to sift through that on Sunday morning, and whatever the bowels of the chicken tell us, that's what we will do. What would be the difference between casting lots and that?
Well, one is very definite. The other calls for a lot of interpretation. And I think lots, by their very nature, had a very limited interpretation that you couldn't look at a chicken gizzard and make a major life decision. Although people did that, in pagan situations. But it seems like the most we see in Judaism or in the early church was this practice of lots, and it's very defined. It's very limited, and so I think there was a protection, and I think it also protected the unity of the early church, and so it may have been used more commonly in the early church than now.
I have been in places in life where I have had two right choices in front of me, and it was very hard to get unstuck because I need to do something. The only bad choice would be nothing. But which of the two good right choices I take is very challenging. And a few times without casting lots, I guess, in my life, I've just been like, well, I got to pick one. And today I feel like that one. Tomorrow I'll probably feel like the other, but I'm going with option A because today's the day I made the choice, and that's what I felt like. And I just got to get unstuck. And so it's an interesting remedy to decision-making paralysis that I guess I haven't even really thought much about until the last few days here, looking at this passage in Esther. I mean, it's just a surprise direction I didn't see my thought processes going in looking at this passage. It's kind of interesting.
Well, I think at times we tend to think of the will of God as a dot. a tiny little dot somewhere out there in space, and we launch, a prayer or a missile, and we hope we hit it. But if we miss it, we're going to go forever into the outer darkness and never return. Or you can say that the will of God is not a dot, it's a circle. And within that circle, there are choices that are both, or even more than both, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 choices, all within the will of God. And if you choose a wooden floor or a carpeted floor, God is pleased either way. And I think when you see the will of God as a circle rather than a dot, it gives you that flexibility to operate without getting all tense and like, what if I miss this? And what if I, fly past the target that is the dot labeled God's will and go forever into this black outer darkness of space, and my life is ruined because I put on the wrong shirt today.
Yeah, that's thoughtful. And it's interesting because the school I went to in high school, there were teachers there who had that kind of single point of light in the darkness, and that is the one place that is the will of God. You got to divine it, and you got to get to it. And I struggled to resonate with what they were trying to teach me, but in that same institution, there were other teachers who were saying something more like what you're saying. And as I've grown up and thought about the Bible more, I'm resonating much, much more with your description. But let me throw out a question. Would you say that God knows in advance and necessarily by merit of his being the supreme being that he already knows what all of those choices are going to be, or can he be surprised by what you pick?
I think he knows what choice we will make because he knows our character. He knows the future. He's the omnipotent God. But I think the age-old question is, does that lead to causality? Does that mean that he causes that decision? Do we truly have a free will? And I think God can direct without causing. It is not always an inevitable case of causation. Now, when you look at Proverbs, and I can't quote the exact verse, but there's a verse in Proverbs, and I'll try to summarize it. It's to the effect of, the lot is cast into the lap, but God decides the outcome.
Yeah, you pretty much nailed it. That's 1633. We talked about it earlier this week. But yeah, the lot is cast into the lap, but it's every decision is from the Lord. That's the NIV rendering.
Yeah, and so the question is that decision a dot or a circle? And it may be that God is directing in some of those sort of nebulous situations where 3 or 4 or 5 things are all in his will. And there may have been more disciples than Matthias who were appointed, who could have filled the place that Judas left vacant.
What do you mean by could have, though? Like could have light of...
I mean, they were qualified. They fulfilled the requirements for the position.
Them being there still would have advanced the redemptive plan. It wouldn't have derailed or wrecked like the whole point of everything God's doing.
Yeah, and I think, even there, doesn't it indicate there were 2 choices to decide from. And so even there, it was a limited decision to seek the will of God. And so either one of those could have been right. And does God enter into that casting of the lot? He probably does in some way. I know that sounds mystical, but I think he can say, all right, either of these are fine. You want my direction, cast the lot, and it's going to happen. But either way is right. Whether God directs the roll of that dice, in this case, we'll call it a dice, or whether it's pure chance, it's either God directs it or that the choices are limited and that either choice is within his will. But either way, God's will is done.
Okay. Agree or disagree with the following statement? God knew in advance the outcome of every dice roll in the history of existence.
You don't ask easy questions. You know that?
Well, we're past the easy questions. Yeah. But, I mean, were there any of those rolls of the dice at any point in human history, a literal physical dice getting rolled on a board where God was like, oh, wow, I thought that was going to be a 2. But, I mean, 5's okay also, I guess.
Yeah, no, God is not surprised by that. But again, coming back to our decisions, God may not be surprised by the roll of the dice, and he's not surprised by our decisions. And in a way, there's a parallel between the roll of the dice and what will we decide.
Yeah.
But God then can be sovereign and allow us the freedom to choose. He can allow the dice to roll to whatever it wants to be, but he knows it just as he knows our decision without causing that decision to occur.
Yeah, I think it's wild that out of the book of Esther, we get a holiday literally named for a dice. Just, I mean, on the surface, what you're celebrating is the deliverance of the Jews, obviously. But at the secondary level, like what you're also celebrating and being reminded of is God, even when you do not see him, is unsurprised and in complete control and sovereign in his reign and his power over everything. And I think ultimately you and I might frame that a little different in terms of how we would set up the conundrum of human agency and God's sovereignty. But I think we end up in the same place, which is all the emphasis is on the sovereignty of God. I don't see a necessary conflict. I don't think you do either, between human decision-making and God's foreknowledge of everything. Foreknowledge is not necessarily the same thing as causation. And I just think the best we can do on this topic is to think about it in pretty linear ways, when in reality only one of the two characters in the equation is linear. That's us. I mean, God is infinite, unbound by anything. So it's hard to calculate using the normal methods of calculation that we do, the relationship between us and our journey through time in a linear way, and God and his very much other all-powerful unlimitedness. It makes sense, I guess, that would be a tricky question. And I think if that tricky question didn't exist within the history of Christian thought, I would have some suspicions about the genuineness of Christian thought in general. That tension must exist.
Well, it's like the little boy who plays checkers, and he's playing against a grandmaster who's playing 4-dimensional chess, and he doesn't understand the moves of the 4-dimensional chess master. And God is playing 4 dimensions or 10 dimensions of chess while we're the little boy learning to play checkers for the first time. And so we are not going to fully understand all of those mysteries. We can take some guesses as to what's going on, but I think the debate will probably continue for another few thousand years before we ever get it fully figured out. And in the meantime, I think we can be gracious to one another along the way.
Yeah, I like your style on that. That's very thoughtful stuff. Thank you for jumping in and thinking about it with me. I told people here earlier this week, a couple days ago or something, about the book you wrote, House Church Now. And
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I kind of gave him the quick rundown. Did you listen to that episode? Did you hear what I said?
No, I haven't heard it, but I'm assuming you said some nice stuff about me in the book.
Yeah, it was generally nice. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay. Real quick, what's the elevator pitch? Why are you excited about the book? What do you think somebody would get out of reading it?
Well, I'm excited about the book because it's going back to the first century and saying before all of the liturgy, before all the robes, before all of the smoke and lights and production, what did the simplicity of the early church look like? And just as, and I'll use an illustration here. When people came across on the Oregon Trail, and I'm a Westerner, I grew up just probably 2 miles north of the Oregon Trail. And yet one of the things in the 1800s, people would arrive at their destination, but yet you'd see that they had cast aside things along the trail. They come to a hill and it's like, we can't get up this hill. Let's throw out our pump organ. And we leave it by the side of the trail. And there were things like that along the Oregon Trail. Well, I look at the early church and I wonder if the simplicity of the early church wasn't something that maybe we threw away. And later when we've arrived at our present destination in our modern world, if we look back and say, we left something pretty precious back there, I wonder if we should go back and get it. And I guess that's kind of the question. And sort of the basic principle of the book is maybe we left something along the trail. Maybe we left something in the past that was valuable. And we need to go back and look at it and maybe reclaim it. So there's the theme of the book in a nutshell.
Okay. And everybody, we're going to put the link down below in the show notes. So if you want to go check that out, it's on Amazon or you can go down there. Thanks in advance for even considering checking it out. I'm grateful to my dad and I'm proud of my dad and I wanted you to know about his book. So appreciate you hanging in here for a longer than usual Saturday bonus episode conversation. And thanks for the hospitality that you all just showed my dad. I appreciate that too. Thanks, Dad.
And thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, you bet. I love you. Talk to you soon.
I love you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.